Warcry, Part 4, by Christopher James Loosely, 2 months before the War of the Gods. War cries rattled through the air as the three companions set themselves towards the northern gate. The ring of steel on steel as the enemy crashed weapons onto shields and drums boomed in the distance. Aris knew what was coming for them. Voranis had made that perfectly clear. Carolinus used the wind to sweep guards from the battlements, whilst Taldir launched throwing knives at others. Aris threw himself at the soldiers on the ground. His glowing gold eyes terrified them, allowing him quick and clean kills.
Out of the way!
Aris shouted, prompting Carolinus and Taldir to jump aside as he concentrated his power. In a huge blast, a beam of white energy obliterated the thick wooden gate as well as the steel portcullis behind it. There was now an opening for them to escape, and Aris charged towards it.
Quickly, go! If she catches up to us, we're finished!
He yelled, grabbing the others by the shoulders, making a break for freedom.
It's too late for that!
A voice hollered, cold and sickening, causing Aris to stop in his tracks. He knew he needed to turn around, but his feet were anchored to the ground, his muscles tight and restrictive. Even with this overwhelming power, something in that voice made him feel like a frightened child. A grunt quickly followed from behind.
I'm talking to you!
The voice called, with a growing impatience. Aris gulped heavily as sweat dampened his brow. But time was not on his side, as several arrows landed in front of the trio, and Aris knew he'd have to fight. He looked down at Taldir, wishing he could have been anywhere but there. The call for archers to knock their arrows, spoken in muffled voices. He then looked at Carolinus, a man who had left such a sour taste in his mouth, yet something had changed in him. Or maybe it had been there the whole time. A leader. Aris closed his eyes for a few moments as he caught the order for the archers to draw their bows. 1,000 years flooded through him, the wars, the battles, every decision that had brought him to this place. He had never known peace. Peace was boring, predictable, and of no use for his particular talents. But as he felt Taldir in his grasp, he finally realized what peace could be. Only one had earned Aris's love, and it had ended in tragedy. However, he had grown fond of Taldir, with several years by the man's side. Yes, he must fight, and he must do it for Taldir, for Carolinus, for Uzorah. Aris turned with bold confidence, raising a wall of fire, searing the volley of arrows in mid-air. Hundreds had closed in around them, with one in the center, one who emanated darkness and death. She wore black leather armor with long raven hair, framing a chalk white face. A twisted grin widened on her face, terrifying, repulsive, beautiful. She stood before him, exactly as he'd expected, a creature of the night, a queen of shadow, Asyn, the goddess of darkness. In her hand she gripped a huge war scythe, which she held out towards Aris.
Where is Voranis?
She hissed, causing Aris's gaze to immediately rest on the broken skull fragments that littered the ground between them. Her eyes shot open in fury and disgust.
Bring me his head!
She screamed, shunting her soldiers forward. A dozen charged Aris, whose sword was already raised. He cut one down, while scorching another, but he knew that there was only so many he could take on at once. As the soldiers began to close in around them, Aris was about to charge straight through them and give his all in one attack against Asyn. But before he could, half a dozen lances of ice shot past him, straight through their targets, whilst another two dropped with throwing knives sticking out of their throats. Carolinus and Taldir had rallied to his side.
You need to leave!
Aris shouted.
It's senseless for us all to die!
His words fell on deaf ears as Carolinus rained fire upon the remaining attackers, a grin curling in the corner of his mouth. "We're not going to let you face her alone," Carolinus replied as he ignited fireballs in his palms. And not a moment too soon, for Asyn had already sent forth another wave, more this time. But the party was not deterred, with the three of them striking out in full force. Taldir dodged, weaved, parried and stabbed, whilst Carolinus called upon the elements to put down his foes. All the while, Aris decimated his attackers. No finesse, no grace, just the brutal destruction of sword and magic. But Asyn had numbers on her side, as well as patience. Wave after wave she sent, with every soldier willing, if not yearning, to die at her command. After a while, it was becoming too much. Eventually, Asyn's forces were beginning to slip through, and Carolinus was no longer able to keep them at bay. Seeing that Carolinus was about to be overrun, Aris jumped in, aiding the mage, but leaving Taldir undefended. Despite his skill, Taldir was only a man, dodging the first sword, parrying the second, but opening himself up to the spear coming in at his flank. Aris turned at the stifled yelp as his companion dropped to the floor. His cry was long, loud, and terrifying, more so than a dragon's roar. In an earth-shattering blast, the battlefield became an inferno, with every foe between them and Asyn bursting into flames. As his last moments of sanity slipped away, Aris turned to Carolinus, his eyes burning like white flames.
You must go! Now!
He bellowed, his eyes turning towards the Dark Lady, whose sickening grin twisted his mind. But Carolinus stood fast, unmoving in his resolve. "I cannot run away while you risk your life in battle," he replied, his own fire rising inside him. But Aris was not taking no for an answer, and, with what little time he had left, squared his shoulders and towered over the mage, a look of finality on his face.
Yes, you can, and you must. You are to lead someday. Something you cannot do if we lose to Asyn. Go, live, and tell everyone what you have seen here today.
His words resonated with Carolinus, but the mage was still hesitant to leave. That is, until Aris shot him a glare more frightening than the Dark Lady herself. With that, Carolinus shot through the gate, running with all the speed his legs could allow, turning back only long enough to see Aris face Asyn head-on. His aura had grown exponentially, and it billowed like white fire, his rage providing the kindling.
Do you think I care about some insignificant mage? Let him go, let him warn them, I welcome it.
Asyn called out, cackling inanely.
There is no one left to stop me. Not even you.
Aris spat at her words. She hadn't even mentioned Taldir, so beneath her she believed him to be. He raised his sword to her, pulling back into a charging position. With a deafening war cry, he threw himself through the flames at her, his blade held high. As she continued to cackle, shadow burst from her entire body, expanding like a wall. Aris lunged at her, with the darkness enveloping them both. Carolinus ran, faster than he'd ever run in his life. Was he being followed? Was he worth killing? He did not know, nor did he care. He would not turn to look. He shot into the forest, bordering on the keep, sweat dripping from his face. Suddenly, the mere rustling of leaves sent shivers down his spine, and every shadow struck fear into his heart. He knew this forest rather well, yet, in his panic, he didn't know if he was heading north or south. He didn't know how long he'd been running before he reached a path, but he still felt as if he was being watched. But he needed to rest, if only for a few seconds. A creaking caught Carolinus off guard, causing him to swing round, only to realize that it was just the branches of an old tree swaying in the night breeze. But then a thud sounded behind him, as if out of nowhere. He trembled, unwilling to turn around. Nothing attacked him, no threats or challenges, just an impatient huff before a light flapping of wings hit his ears. Hesitantly, he turned, barely able to keep his eyes open. However, the sight gave great relief, which Carolinus expressed as a soft sigh. It was a griffin, a beautifully magnificent creature, with white feathers, tanned hair. But it was in no mood to be admired. Another huff and stomping of his front talons told Carolinus that it wanted out of this place just as much as he. Not forgetting his manners, he quickly bowed to the beast, making eye contact all the while, before running over and hopping on its back. With a leap and a bound, they were in the air, scaling the trees. Within seconds, they were high above the tree line, with Uzorah stretched out before them. Carolinus could see the towers of Light's Reach, and that was where they were heading. The griffin moved without prompting, knowing exactly where it was going. When they reached the city, Carolinus heard songs of rejoicing emanating from the streets below, as if it were some kind of festival. But he did not take in their words, not when he already had so much on his mind. Hopefully there was someone in this city who could help him. The griffin landed at the Lord's palace, which Carolinus marveled at for the 100th time, despite his disposition. They were in the back courtyard within the gardens, and it seemed they were eagerly awaited. The first to step forward was indeed a welcome sight, his master, the Archmage. He ran over, almost lifting Carolinus from the griffin's back, holding him like a son.
My boy, I thought I'd lost you,
he exclaimed as he hugged him tight, unable to truly express his relief. Once the two parted, Carolinus bowed to the Archmage, a solemn look on his face.
Apologies, Master. I failed the mission. I failed you. I failed Aris.
Carolinus was almost on the verge of tears as he spoke, but the Archmage grabbed his shoulders tightly, but reassuringly.
Not every mission can be a success, but that doesn't mean you failed. I put you in a very dangerous position sending you into that camp. I'm just glad you're back safe.
The Archmage responded kindly. However, a voice behind him sounded less assured.
Does this mean Aris has fallen?
Carolinus turned to see Spy Master Gallic with a genuine look of worry on his face. Carolinus could not formulate an answer, not one that could ease the man, nor one that could actually explain. The Archmage turned to face Gallic with an earnest smile hesitantly settling on his face.
This is not the time for an explanation. We shall take him before the 7, where everyone can be present for the debriefing.
And with that, the Archmage rustled the griffin's feathers, bowing his head as he did, with the beast bowing back, before heading over to a trough of water. But as the Archmage redirected his attention to Carolinus, the young mage's face was one of pure astonishment. Did he just say, the Seven? Was he really going to meet them? The gods? Carolinus was led into the great hall where lords, ladies, advisors, and even royalty had gathered. The Archmage immediately wandered over to a greatly decorated individual whom Carolinus recognized as King Raiden, the Idouard ruler. There must have been more than 50 people, all circling the center of the room, but King Raiden and the Archmage walked straight through the center of them, each one bowing with respect as they let them through. After a minute or so, the rabble parted, revealing a most splendid sight. They stood at least a head and shoulders above the tallest man in the room, and their forms were bathed in soft lights of varying colors. But one light burned the brightest. Unmistakably, she was Adrione, the goddess of fire. Carolinus's gaze was locked on the woman, with flame-orange hair and matching eyes. At her waist hung 2 bold scimitars with dragon hilts, her hands intermittently hovering over them. Carolinus was fixed on her. Something about her.
Carolinus, please step forward.
The Archmage called, ripping the young mage's focus from him. He looked to his mentor and did as he was bidden until he stood before them. Out of respect, he knelt, averting his eyes, unsure what the appropriate action of meeting a god should be.
My boy, if you can, please recount the mission for all who are gathered. I need you to be as thorough as possible, every detail that you can remember.
Carolinus looked to the Archmage and nodded, before taking a few deep breaths to calm his nerves. He told them everything, from the moment they left. He spoke of Aris's ingenuity and leadership, ashamed to admit his folly of holding him in such low esteem. He told them of the archer, whose name was revealed to be Salihn, and her death at the hand of Aranis. At this time, he saw King Raiden's face drop in sorrow, for she had served him honorably and faithfully. As his story continued, he noticed that Adrione's orange aura had brightened to a yellow, and that she was becoming increasingly agitated. Eventually, he concluded his accounts, with Aris launching himself at Asyn. When his eyes raised, most in the room seemed sympathetic to his plight, including most of the gods. But Adrione was not one of them. Many, including Carolinus, had realized that the once orange aura had turned white, flickering with the intensity of a terrible storm. Without words, she began to stomp across the room towards the doors. Carolinus quivered with fear, wondering what he'd done wrong. But Kadros, the god of light himself, approached him, resting a reassuring hand on his shoulder.
Do not burden yourself, young mage,
he said, his own eyes glowing a soft white.
We have lost one of our greatest champions today, and Adrione has lost a little bit more.
After a brief smile, Kadros left in the direction of Adrione, as did the others, leaving a bemused crowd in their wake. But curiosity was too much, and the congregation followed in their path out to the gardens. Carolinus stayed at the Archmage's side as they traversed the crowd, only to see Adrione staring into the night sky, her attention focused to the south.
Mage, is that where you were held?
She called, her voice booming. Carolinus looked to the fortress where she pointed, before nervously confirming. With that, fireballs ignited in her palms, swirling and flickering.
What are you going to do?
Kadros asked, authority dripping from his voice and stance. But Adrione didn't even look round. Her eyes were focused on the last known whereabouts of Asyn, the goddess of shadow.
I'm going to show her that we are coming!
Her hand shot up into the air. The clouds lit up as fire burned the sky. It was as beautiful as it was terrifying. Even from the castle, Carolinus could feel the heat upon his face. He watched in a silent, terrified awe as she threw down her arms and fire rained from the sky as lava from a volcano. A look of satisfied pleasure rested upon Adrione's face. She smiled as the fortress was set ablaze and the stone began to melt. Eventually, she ceased her assault, and her satisfied grin fell away to reveal a look of anguish. She wandered over to Carolinus, kneeling to look him in the eyes, giving him a brief but genuine smile, before standing and walking away.
Where are you going?
Kadros called out, attempting to follow, but she raised a hand in protest with a look of determination on her face.
I must go to my temple and find out why the others have disappeared. And I suggest you do the same. Asyn would never have gotten this far if they were fighting.
She said, narrowing her eyes. Kadros nodded, but Carolinus was confused. Who were the others? Were there more gods? Or were they something different? But before he could think too hard on it, Adrione shot him a final glance.
Be safe, young one. I see a glorious life for you. You will fight with us when we push Asyn back to the pit she crawled out of.
And with no more to be said, she left, leaving a melancholic mood in her wake. Some were stunned silent, whilst others frantically conversed, but the remaining gods spoke with purpose and understanding. For the final time this night, Kadros addressed the crowd.
There are things that need to be done before we banish this blight from our lands. But know that we remain beside you, and will fight for you. Return to your homes, and we will call upon you when the preparations have been made. I assure you all that we will have peace in Uzorah once again. But until then, prepare for war.